Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip quietly through the candlelit shadows of the Middle Ages, where the scent of beeswax, sweat, and incense cling to stone walls, and the air hums with the contradictions of sin and desire. You're not in a movie. You're standing in a time when love was sacred, lust was deadly, and confession lines were longer than bread queues. It's the kind of world where a kiss could damn your soul. But as you'll soon find, almost nobody cared enough to stop. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a tavern somewhere near Paris, around the year 1320. The air tastes like roasted onions, sour oil, and sin. A lute is playing off, key but earnest, and a couple of young men in wool tunics are laughing too loudly at a joke you don't understand. Across the room, a woman in a red headscarf looks over her shoulder, catches your eye, and smiles. The kind of smile that could either invite conversation or start a duel. Desire in this time isn't the glossy romance of modern stories. It's raw, smoky, and bound in rules you barely comprehend. The church says that the flesh is corrupt, that lust is a gateway to eternal damnation. Yet here, in the warmth of the tavern, flesh feels like the only honest thing left. You step closer to the fire. A man beside you, missing a few teeth, and blessed with more courage than sobriety, leans in to whisper that he once saw a priest slip out of a brothel at dawn, rosary still dangling from his wrist. He laughs, then catches himself and mutters an apology to the Virgin Mary. It's an uneasy balance, this dance between faith and temptation. Medieval Europe was obsessed with sin. Lust wasn't just frowned upon, it was feared, catalogued, and measured like a contagion. Manuals written for confessors, like the Summer Confessorum, listed hundreds of variations of sexual sins, each with its own punishment. Sleeping with your neighbor's wife, penance and public shame, touching yourself, eternal damnation, and maybe a week of fasting if you were lucky. But historians still argue whether ordinary people actually took all that seriously, or if the church was mostly shouting into a void filled with laughter, gossip, and the creak of tavern beds. Outside the tavern, the streets are narrow and dark, lined with puddles that shimmer in the torchlight. Somewhere, a cat yowls. Somewhere else, a monk prays for forgiveness for the entire town. You follow the sound of a lute again, this time to a corner where a troubadour sings about forbidden love. A nobleman and a shepherd girl, doomed by difference, but united by passion. The crowd sighs. They know that story too well. Here's a historical fact by the 13th century. The church had officially declared that sex was only acceptable for the purpose of procreation, and only within marriage. Anything else, even between husband and wife, was sin. Theologians argued over which positions were less offensive to God, as if heaven had a bureaucratic filing system for bedroom behavior. Yet, outside the cloisters, human nature continued as it always had, messy, impulsive, and beautifully disobedient. You pass an old woman selling charms by the door. She's got a basket of tiny wooden hearts, each carved with a crude symbol. For love. She croaks, or to stop it. You ask her what she means, and she tells you that some people come begging for affection, while others pay to be rid of it. The idea that love is both a blessing and a curse is as old as time itself. The flickering candlelight dances across the tables, revealing faces flushed from drink, from warmth, from the nearness of bodies. There's laughter, but also tension, the kind that prickles the air before a storm. You can almost sense the guilt, too, hanging over the room like smoke. A friar enters, his brown robes trailing mud. The crowd hushes. He's come to collect tithes, but his eyes linger too long on the woman in the red scarf. You can't help but notice the irony. The man sent to warn of temptation seems tempted himself. One quirky tidbit. In medieval France, it wasn't unusual for taverns and bathhouses to double as unofficial meeting spots for lovers, or for transactions of a more physical kind. Bathhouses especially had a reputation for indulgence. They were the social media of the 14th century. Everyone pretended to go for hygiene, but they really went for gossip, flirtation, and scandal. You make your way out of the tavern, a little dizzy from the heat and noise. The night air is cold and wet, and you can hear the distant toll of a church bell. It's curfew, meant to send the pious home and the sinners deeper into hiding. You follow the shadowed alleyways, past half-timbered houses and shuttered windows, until you reach a small chapel. Its door is ajar. Inside, candles flicker before a statue of the Virgin Mary, her painted face serene, her eyes impossibly kind. Someone has left a wilted flower at her feet. An apology, maybe, for what the night has already taken. The chapel smells of wax and rain. You kneel, just to rest your legs. And imagine what it would feel like to live under this constant pressure. To be told that your body is dangerous, your thoughts are poison, and your very heartbeat might betray you. Still, the medieval mind found ways to balance the scales. Lust wasn't simply evil. It was also seen as proof of life, of the body's stubborn will. Some theologians even argued that without temptation, virtue meant nothing. The struggle itself, they said, was holy. It's comforting, in a strange way, to know that even the saints had to sweat a little. A sudden gust of wind blows through the chapel, snuffing out a candle. The smoke rises like a ghost, curling toward the ceiling. You feel a shiver crawl up your spine. In this age, every shadow has a story. Every whisper could be a sin, or a prayer. You walk back into the night, following the cobblestones that glisten like wet coins under the moon. Somewhere a drunk is singing. Somewhere a couple is meeting in secret. And somewhere, maybe in the same tavern you just left, someone is already confessing tomorrow's sin tonight. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages truly lived in fear of damnation, or whether they simply learned to juggle guilt and pleasure like two halves of the same coin. You suspect it's the latter. Humans rarely give up the things that make them feel alive. As you reach the town's edge, the fields stretch out under a bruised sky. A barn creaks in the distance. You can almost hear laughter, soft and secret, behind its wooden doors. The stars above are cold and endless, but down here, in the mud and hay, warmth still finds its way into the world. And as you stand there, breathing in the chill, you realize something. In this age of saints and sinners, sin is often just love wearing the wrong costume. The morning light creeps in like a guilty secret, thin, grey, and uncertain. You find yourself walking through the cloisters of a monastery just after dawn. The air smells of damp stone and cold porridge. Bells toll somewhere in the distance, slow and deliberate, marking the hours of prayer. Around you, monks move in silence, their sandals whispering against the flagstones. You're supposed to feel peace here. That's the point of monastic life. Silence, discipline, purity. But you sense something restless beneath the surface, like a heartbeat under a robe. The faces you pass are calm, yes, but also tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. Desire doesn't disappear behind stone walls. It just gets creative. A young novice catches your eye and quickly looks away. His cheeks flush red, and he mutters something about fetching water. You watch him go, the hem of his robe brushing the floor. He's probably been told that even noticing beauty is dangerous. The devil enters through the eyes, warned Saint Jerome centuries earlier, and the church took that seriously. Too seriously. In this world, chastity isn't just a personal vow, it's a performance of holiness. The holier you look, the higher your spiritual stock. but keeping the body obedient to the soul. That's an everyday war. You move toward the courtyard, where a few monks tend a garden of herbs, lavender, mint, and rue. A blackbird sings from the roof. One monk explains that they grow rue to cool the passions. You raise an eyebrow. He chuckles and admits that even monks need a little help quieting their blood. He gestures toward a small bottle of vinegar infused with the herb. A drop on the tongue. He says, the urges vanish. You're not convinced. There's a real historical detail here. Medieval monks and nuns were encouraged to eat bland, cold foods, lettuce, fish, vinegar, believed to suppress lust. Spices, honey, and wine were discouraged because they were thought to heat the humours. In short, the Middle Ages invented the first anti-romance diet. Still, no amount of lettuce could silence the human heart. Records survive of monks caught sneaking out at night, of nuns giving birth behind convent walls, of abbots quietly covering up scandals to save reputations. Historians still argue whether such cases were rare or simply underreported. But the confessional whispers and court documents tell their own story. The cloistered life was rarely as spotless as its reputation. You wander into the scriptorium, where monks copy manuscripts by hand. The air is thick with ink and candle smoke. Pages of parchment lie drying on racks. One brother is illustrating a psalm, his quill moving with reverence, until you notice the tiny figure he's doodled in the margin. A naked Adam chasing a startled Eve with a fig leaf. You stifle a laugh. He looks up sharply, then smiles just a little. Even here, humor leaks through the cracks of devotion. A gentle voice behind you says, "Art is a temptation too." You turn to find the abbot himself, a man whose face looks carved from patience. He tells you that beauty is dangerous because it distracts the mind from God. Yet he also admits that beauty leads many people to God in the first place. That paradox is at the heart of medieval theology. Sin and sanctity holding hands, refusing to let go. He gestures toward a doorway that leads to the convent across the river. They struggle too, he says quietly. We all do. And so you go. The convent is quieter still. A single bell marks the hour of labor, and nuns move through the corridors with serene precision. You pass an open window, where one young woman is singing softly as she kneads bread. Her voice is clear and lonely, the kind that could make a statue weep. When she notices you listening, she blushes, but she doesn't stop. Maybe she sings because it's the only way to feel free. In some convents, women joined because they were devoted to God. In others, they joined because their families couldn't afford a dowry, or didn't want another mouth to feed. For them, chastity wasn't a choice, it was a career path. The walls that protected them also trapped them. You hear a story from one of the older sisters about a nun who fell in love with a traveling priest. They exchanged letters hidden in hymnals, written in invisible ink made from lemon juice. One night, she tried to run away with him. They were caught at the gate. The priest was defrocked and exiled. She was forced to spend her remaining years in silence. Literally. They sewed a small veil across her mouth during prayers as punishment. The sister lowers her voice when she finishes the story, as though the memory itself is dangerous. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some medieval convents had so many disciplinary problems that bishops joked they needed guards more than priests. In one famous 15th century case in Zurich, nuns refused to stay cloistered, sneaking out for dances and secret picnics with local boys. When investigators arrived, the abbess greeted them with wine and said, "We are cloistered enough in spirit." You can't help but admire the confidence. But not all transgressions were playful. Some ended in tragedy. In 1318, a nun in France claimed she was visited by an angel who touched her in ways that made her feel both terrified and divinely blessed. The church investigated. They ruled it wasn't an angel, but a man in disguise. the poor woman was executed for heresy. Historians still argue whether she truly believed her story or if it was a cover born of fear. You wander through the convent garden, where herbs bloom beside tombstones. The names on the stones are worn smooth. Maybe some of these women once laughed like the singer in the kitchen. Maybe some still haunt the hallways at night, whispering prayers for love they were never allowed to show. A bell rings again. Time for prayers. You watch as the sisters line up, hands folded, eyes downcast. The air feels heavy, sacred, and unbearably human. You sit in the back as they begin to chant. The harmonies fill the stone chamber, rising and falling like breath. For a moment, you feel weightless, caught between two worlds, the earthly and the divine. It's easy to see why some people mistook passion for piety, or piety for passion. The difference is thin as parchment. One sister breaks rhythm for half a beat. Her voice catches on a note that sounds suspiciously like longing. Maybe for God. Maybe for someone else. You'll never know. When the prayer ends, they file out silently. You linger, watching dust float through the light from a narrow window. You think about how these walls hold both holiness and heartbreak, laughter and guilt, the echo of every forbidden thought that ever dared to exist here. As you leave the convent, the sun is climbing higher, burning the mist away. You feel the warmth on your face, and it's almost a relief after so much stone and shadow. You can't help thinking that if sin is the act of reaching for warmth, then the world was built to make sinners of us all. You walk toward the river. A monk is there, fishing, humming an old hymn. He tells you that temptation is like the current. It pulls, it tests, but it also teaches you how strong you are. Then he grins and adds, and sometimes it just wins. The honesty feels refreshing after all that silence. As the bell tolls again, echoing through the valley, you realize something. In medieval monasteries, sin wasn't the enemy. It was the reminder that they were still human. And maybe that's the most sacred thing of all. The road leads you away from cloisters and candles, out into the open air of the medieval village fair. The world feels louder here, mud squelching under boots, roosters crowing, traders shouting over one another about onions, cloth, and sheep. You smell roasting meat, fresh bread, and the unmistakable tang of livestock. In the midst of it all, you realize something. Lust might have been condemned in monasteries, but out here, it was woven into daily life, like the threads of a worn tunic. You pass a booth where a young woman is selling ribbons. She's laughing with a farmer who clearly has no intention of buying anything. It's all smiles and sidelong glances, the ancient art of flirtation disguised as commerce. Around the next corner, a priest blesses couples lining up before a notary's stall. They're not buying goods, they're buying futures. Marriage contracts, sealed with ink and God's approval. But there's nothing romantic about it, at least not in the modern sense. Here, love isn't about butterflies, it's about cows, coins, and alliances. A marriage without property attached is like a feast without bread. It simply doesn't make sense. You watch as one father argues over his daughter's dowry. The girl herself looks at the ground, her hands folded tight. She's maybe 16. The man she's about to marry is twice her age, and his hands look like he's spent a lifetime gripping plow handles. Still, the father smiles when the deal is done. The notary nods. The priest mutters a quick blessing. The girl's mother wipes her eyes, and just like that, two lives are bound together by signatures and expectation. It's a scene repeated thousands of times across the Middle Ages. Marriage was less a union of hearts and more a contract between families. Love, if it came at all, was expected to appear later, like an afterthought. Some lucky couples found it. Others endured a lifetime of polite coldness. Historians still argue whether affection within arranged marriages was common or rare. Surviving letters hint that people did grow to love each other, but often only after the initial awkwardness faded. And the crops didn't fail. Nearby, a group of boys are laughing as they peek into a fortune teller's tent. A painted sign reads, "Seoyua ftui barida im techwara." Inside, an old woman peers into a basin, pretending to summon visions. One boy gasps when she names the girl he secretly likes. You suspect she's just been watching him all week. A quirky tidbit, some medieval fairs sold love apples. Not real apples, but small charms filled with perfumed herbs. Girls carried them to attract suitors, while men bought them as gifts to show interest. The church frowned on these, of course, calling them temptations in wax. But the practice persisted, and you can't help but think they were just the medieval version of scented DMs. The fair is also where the flesh was openly traded, though not always in the way you'd expect. Marriage was a marketplace, but so was the body itself. You notice a group of women standing near the edge of the square, skirts brighter than anyone else's. They're not selling ribbons. You recognize them from the tavern nights. Courtesans and public women, as the polite term goes. Their presence is tolerated because, strangely enough, the church considered them a necessary evil. It's true. One mainstream fact theologians, like Saint Augustine, argued that prostitution, while sinful, was better than chaos. Without it, he warned, the world would be convulsed with lust. So, brothels were quietly licensed in many towns. The money went to local lords, and the sinners were safely contained, at least in theory. One of the women catches your eye and waves. She's wearing a yellow hood, the mark required by law to distinguish prostitutes from honest women. The color is meant to shame, but she wears it like gold. "Want to hear a joke?" she calls. You nod. "They say we're damned for pleasure," she says. But the priests keep buying indulgences. You can't help but laugh. Her humor hides exhaustion, though. Life at the margins is always a bargain. In many towns, brothel workers had to pay taxes, follow curfews, and undergo health inspections that no man ever faced. Some owned their own houses, others were little more than property themselves. Yet even here, they carved out a kind of freedom. No father to obey, no husband to endure. It was a dangerous independence, but it was theirs. As the sun climbs higher, the fair grows rowdier. Minstrels sing bawdy songs while jugglers toss knives. A boy runs by waving a wooden sword, pretending to be a knight rescuing a maiden. You watch a merchant couple bickering over prices, then suddenly laughing, then suddenly not. It's a rhythm as old as civilization itself, the push and pull of desire wrapped in daily survival. You find yourself standing before a small wooden stage where a troupe of actors is performing a morality play. The villain, lust, personified, wears red tights and a devilish grin. The hero, chastity, carries a giant white shield. The audience jeers and cheers as lust prances around, making jokes too obvious to miss. Even the priest watching from the corner can't help but smile. It's all a bit of theatre, but it reflects something real. The medieval world loved to lecture about sin, yet it also loved to laugh at it. Plays, songs, even sermons used humour to make the moral medicine go down. And perhaps that's why people could live surrounded by strict rules without losing their minds. Mockery was its own kind of release valve. You wander behind the stage after the play and find the actors counting coins. One woman, still dressed as chastity, lights a cigarette made of rolled herbs and sighs. "You know," she says, "half the audience flirts with me after every show. They want what they just booed." She blows out smoke that smells faintly of sage. It's all theatre, darling, even confession. There's truth in that. You think back to the monastery and the convent. The vows, the guilt, the constant fight against desire. Then you look around the fair and see people embracing that same desire openly, shamelessly, even joyfully. Both worlds claim to serve God. Maybe both are right in their own way. By afternoon, clouds gather, and rain begins to fall. The fair scatters. Merchants covering their wares. Animals bleating, lovers running for shelter. You duck beneath a canvas awning beside a blacksmith's stall. He's hammering a horseshoe, sparks flying like fireflies. You ask him about his marriage. He laughs and says, "My wife and I yell every morning, kiss every night, and pray every Sunday. It works." That's the medieval secret, isn't it? Amid the theology and judgment, life just went on. People loved, thought, forgave, and tried again. Not saints, not sinners, just humans trying to make sense of both. When the rain stops, the air smells cleaner, the mud darker. The crowd returns. Voices rising once more. You catch a glimpse of the girl with the red scarf again. The one from the tavern. She's dancing barefoot in a puddle, spinning to the sound of a drum. Her laughter cuts through the grey like sunlight. In that moment, you realize something simple and eternal. Sin might be what the church called it, but to the people who lived it, love, lust, longing, all of it, was just part of being alive. And survival, in its own messy way, was the holiest act of all. You step back onto the road as dusk settles, the fair's noise fading behind you. Somewhere ahead, bells toll again, calling the faithful to prayer. But for now, your only devotion is to the rhythm of your own heartbeat, steady and human beneath the cooling sky. The rain follows you through the countryside like a patient ghost. It clings to your cloak, seeps into your boots, and softens the path that leads toward the next town. A quieter one, built around a stone church that leans ever so slightly. As though tired of carrying the weight of everyone's secrets, you've come to a place where people don't confess to one another. They confess upward, to God, through an anxious middleman in a dark wooden box. You push open the church doors. The smell hits first wax, damp stone, and something older, like the breath of centuries. Candles sputter along the altar. A line of villagers waits near the confessional, eyes down, hands clasped. You join them, because that's what people do here. Everyone's got something to whisper. Inside, the booth is smaller than you imagined. You kneel on the hard wood, peering through the tiny grill. On the other side, a shadow shifts. The priest. His voice is a low murmur. Speak. My child. You freeze for a second. What would you even say? That you've walked through monasteries and markets, watched forbidden glances, listened to laughter that bordered on sin. That you've realized people in this age are not so different from those today, still ruled by the same twin forces of guilt and longing. Instead, you say nothing. You just listen. A woman ahead of you whispers through tears. She confesses to thinking of her neighbor's husband. A farmer admits he drank too much ale and looked too long at a girl in the tavern. A boy says he forgot to pray before bed. The priest sighs, mutters penances, offers blessings. It's like watching guilt being traded for relief, coin for coin. The confessional, you realize, is the medieval world's therapy session, minus the sofa, plus eternal consequences. And it's more than spiritual. It's social. Confession binds people together. Everyone sins, everyone repents, everyone keeps the same secret, that they all secretly enjoyed it. Historians still argue whether confession was truly about moral cleansing or about control. Keeping the church inside every heart, every bed, every thought. A quirky fact, medieval confession manuals were incredibly detailed. Priests were trained to ask very specific questions, sometimes embarrassingly so. Where were your hands? Did you feel pleasure? Was the act completed? It sounds nosy now, but in that time, the priest's curiosity was justified as moral inventory. You can imagine how awkward those sessions must have been. You leave the booth before your turn, stepping into the nave again. Sunlight filters through stained glass, painting red and blue halos on the stone floor. The image of Saint Mary Magdalene glows above you, half saint, half sinner, forgiven and adored. Maybe that's why she's so popular. She offers the fantasy of redemption without the need to erase desire. At the church door, you see a familiar face. The woman from the confessional line, now kneeling before a small statue. She's clutching a rosary and whispering something that sounds less like a prayer and more like a bargain. Her husband, standing nearby, pretends not to notice. You realize that in this age, sin isn't always a single act. It's a conversation between silence and survival. Outside, the world is still damp and grey. A friar stands beneath the eaves, handing out bits of parchment, letters of indulgence. For a small donation, he explains, your sins can be shortened in purgatory. Not erased, of course. He adds cheerfully, but God will see your generosity. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. The Almighty appreciates good business, he says. You almost laugh, but it's not a joke. The indulgence trade was real, a thriving medieval economy of guilt. Buy forgiveness now, suffer less later. Some people treated it like spiritual insurance. And yet, there's something tragically human about it. The people paying the friar aren't greedy. They're terrified. The church told them that lust could lead not just to social shame, but to eternal flames. You can't blame them for wanting a receipt for mercy. You walk with the friar a while. He's talkative, cheerful, maybe a little too comfortable with sin for someone wearing a habit. Most folks confess the same things, he says. Drinking, envy, carnal thoughts. Nothing new under heaven. He glances at you. You'd be surprised how often the priests confess to me, though. We're all in the same mud, my friend. You think back to the abbot and the convent singer, their struggles, their quiet defiance. Maybe the entire medieval world is built on that tension, everyone pretending to rise above temptation while secretly wading through it together. By midday, you follow the friar to the edge of town, where a public square is forming a crowd. There's a wooden platform and a tall post at the center. You ask what's happening. Penance, the friar says too casually. A woman stands barefoot on the platform, her hair undone, a placard around her neck that reads adulteress. She's pale, trembling, but proud. A man in armor, her husband, stands beside the local magistrate. The priest announces her sin, the crowd murmurs, and someone throws a cabbage. It misses. This isn't just punishment, it's theater. The villagers watch with the same fascination you saw at the morality play. Lust is always more entertaining than virtue, even when it's wrapped in humiliation. The friar beside you sighs. She'll do her week of fasting, he says. Then he'll take her back. Happens all the time. He sounds almost bored. You can't help but wonder who confesses afterward. The punished, or the crowd that enjoyed it. A real historical note, public penance, like this was common in medieval Europe, especially for sexual sins. Sometimes the offender wore plain linen and carried a candle. Sometimes, like this woman, they stood half clothed before the town. The logic was simple. Shame purifies. But historians still debate whether it actually deterred sin, or just fed the fascination people already had with it. As the crowd disperses, you approach the woman. She's sitting on the edge of the platform now, rubbing her wrists. You offer her a cup of water. She looks up, eyes sharp. They'll confess worse tomorrow, she says. Then, with a faint smile, and so will I. Her honesty disarms you. In a world built on guilt, truth sounds like rebellion. You walk away as the bells begin to ring for evening prayer. The friar heads back toward town, pockets jingling with indulgence coins. The sky burns orange, and the air smells faintly of wood smoke and rain. You stop by the riverbank, watching the reflection of the church shimmer on the water. The confessional door will close again tonight, swallowing more secrets. The punishment platform will be empty until next week. And the same hearts that trembled in guilt will tremble again in desire. Maybe that's the real cycle of the medieval soul. Not sin and punishment, but need and forgiveness. Again and again, like breathing, you look toward the horizon, where torches flicker in the distance. Another village, another set of whispers waiting to be told. You pull your cloak tighter and start walking, because you already knows, wherever there are walls, there are secrets. And wherever there's sin, there's someone waiting to sell you forgiveness. The next morning arrives cold and sharp. The mist lies heavy over the meadows, thick enough to blur the outlines of cottages and barns. You follow the faint sound of bells through the fog, until the air smells of animals and wood smoke. This is not a town of nobility or monks. It's a peasant village, the bottom rung of medieval life. Here, sin looks different. The people you meet are bent with labor, hands cracked, faces marked by sun and hunger. For them, lust and gluttony aren't decadent sins. They're survival instincts. When food is scarce, eating too much isn't a moral failing, it's insurance. When winters are long, the body's need for warmth, any warmth, becomes its own kind of prayer. You pass a field where a group of women are threshing grain. Their laughter carries over the wind, coarse, unfiltered, real. One of them, broad-shouldered and bold-eyed, calls out, "Traveller! You want bread, or just company?" Her friends laugh, not cruelly, but knowingly. This is what the church never fully understood. Sin was a luxury for the rich. But for the poor, it was a brief rebellion against misery. As you share a hunk of bread by the fire, one of the older women tells you about the local lord, a man who taxes not only their harvest, but their daughters. He calls it a right. She spits. The right of the first night. You've read about this before. Just prime noctis. The supposed medieval custom allowing lords to sleep with a peasant bride on her wedding night. Historians now argue it was more legend than law. But in villages like this, power didn't need parchment to be real. Some girls run away before marriage, the woman says. Join the convents, or worse. She means the brothels. The way she says worse tells you which one she thinks is the greater sin. The mist begins to lift, revealing the outlines of a wooden inn at the far end of the road. You decide to rest there for the night. Inside, the fire is loud, the owl stronger than you expect, and the company louder still. The innkeeper, a round man with red cheeks, moves between tables with a grin. Confess your thirst, friend, and I'll absolve it. He jokes, filling mugs. The laughter that follows is earthy and alive. After days among cloisters and confessions, this feels like a different religion. One of sweat, bread and song. A young man at your table leans closer, voice low. You're not from here, are you? You shake your head. He grins. Then you should know. Every town has its own saints. Ours just happen to wear aprons instead of halos. You look toward the corner, where a woman is dancing for a small crowd of travelers. Her dress is plain but fitted, her hair loose. The men watch with hungry smiles, the women with a mix of envy and pity. You recognize the tone of the crowd. It's the same fascination that followed the adulteress in the square. When she finishes, she walks straight past the cheering men and sits by the fire beside you. You didn't clap, she says, not unkindly. You tell her you didn't know if she wanted applause. Of course I don't, she says. But it's what they expect. Her name is Katrin. Once, she says, she was married to a miller who died of fever. The church forbade her to remarry so soon, but the landlord demanded his rent anyway. So I dance, she says, and sometimes I listen. Men tell secrets when they drink. She leans back, eyes glinting. Priests too. When they come through, there's a pause. The fire crackles. You ask what kind of secrets. She smiles faintly. The same ones everyone has. They just dress them in Latin. It's the perfect summary of the medieval world. You think of it long after she leaves the table. Outside, the stars are unusually clear. The air smells of hay and smoke, and somewhere an owl calls. You realize the same sky looked down on every sinner and saint you've met. The abbess who prayed through tears, the friar who sold indulgences, the farmer's wife who whispered bargains at the altar, and now this woman, dancing not for pleasure but survival. History books rarely mention her, but she's the thread that holds the age together. The woman who sins because the world gives her no other currency. You lie awake in the inn's loft, listening to the distant hum of a lute downstairs. The melody drifts upward, soft and circular, like a lullaby for the damned. You think about how easily guilt and grace blur together. Maybe that's what makes this age so haunting, not its cruelty, but its honesty. Because in the medieval night, everyone knows they're sinners. They just hope God is tired enough not to notice tonight. The next morning, you leave the village behind. The road bends through hills dotted with wildflowers and the ruins of an old Roman wall. Stones left behind by an empire that once thought itself eternal. Now goats climb where generals once marched. You touch the rough edge of the wall and think of time, how it erases pride, but never hunger. By afternoon, you reach another settlement, a bustling market town, larger and louder. Bells ring, vendors shout, and everywhere you turn, people are bargaining for grain, for cloth, for forgiveness. At the edge of the square, a wooden cart creaks by, painted with bright colors. On its side, in uneven letters, is written, "The Miracles of Saint Foy." A traveling troupe. You follow them as they set up for the evening performance. The stage is crude, but the actors are talented. They perform stories of holy women who resisted temptation, saints who refused kings, kissed crosses instead of lips, and died beautifully. The crowd watches, rapt. But when the lights dim and the players rest, you overhear them laughing behind the curtain. One of the actresses pulls off her veil, swigs from a flask, and mutters, "Saint Foy never had to deal with fleas." Another adds, "Or taxes." It's absurd and perfect. Even holiness, you realize, is theatre here, half sermon, half survival. As night falls, you sit by the dying fire with the troupe. They ask what you're writing in your small notebook. You tell them you're collecting stories. "Then write this one," the lead actor says. "Write that even sinners can make saints, if the crowd needs one." He raises his cup. The others join in, toasting the saints, the sinners, and the fools who keep confusing them. The flames flicker against their faces, and for a moment, the centuries feel thin. You're not just visiting the medieval world anymore. You're sitting inside its pulse. The road grows quieter as you leave the market town behind, the laughter of the actors fading into the distance like echoes in a cathedral. The air turns cooler, the land flattens into long stretches of meadow and hedgerow. Somewhere far off, you hear the faint toll of a church bell. It's not summoning anyone, it's warning. You find yourself at a small monastic library, a place where the air smells of ink, wax, and slow decay. A monk with an unhurried voice leads you inside. "We guard the word here," he says softly, but his eyes glimmer with something you can't quite name. Curiosity, maybe, or fear. The library is a vault of contradictions. Rows upon rows of heavy manuscripts sit chained to their shelves, their iron links clinking when you pass. "We're chained books," the monk explains, "not to punish them, but to protect them." But from whom, you wonder? The thieves, or the readers? You brush dust from a leather spine and glimpse a title, De Secretis Mulierum, on the secrets of women. Written in the 13th century, it claims to explain female anatomy and desire. The text is a strange blend of theology and guesswork. The author writes with authority on subjects he clearly does not understand. According to him, women conceive based on the phase of the moon, and passion rises when the wind comes from the south. You smirk quietly. Poor souls. Their science half magic. Their magic half gossip. The monk clears his throat. That one, he says, was almost banned. He looks left, then right, and adds, almost. You soon learn that almost banned means secretly read by everyone who pretends not to. This, you realize, is how knowledge moves in the Middle Ages. Not through open debate, but whispered transmission. The church condemns books about love, lust, or anatomy, but those same books somehow survive in every monastery. It's the medieval version of hiding scandalous novels under a mattress. One scroll catches your eye, a faded parchment filled with looping script and tiny illustrations. The title Ars Amatoria, Ovid's The Art of Love. Roman, pagan, and utterly forbidden. You can practically hear a medieval bishop's teeth grinding at the idea of monks copying a manual on seduction. Yet here it sits, copied with exquisite care, each flourish of Inca quiet rebellion. Some of us believe beauty is not a sin, the monk murmurs, but we copy in the dark, so no one sees the light. You turn another page, where Ovid describes how to write love letters and what gestures melt hearts. It's oddly tender. You imagine a young scribe, candle burning low, tracing these words in Latin, while pretending it's merely for linguistic study. Historians still argue whether such secret copying was tolerated or simply ignored. The church's power was vast, but curiosity was stubborn. You can chain a book, but you can't chain the mind that reads it. A rustle breaks your thoughts. In the corner, another monk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, hides something under his sleeve. You catch a glimpse, a small scrap of parchment, covered not in Latin, but in rhyme. You wait until the first monk turns away, then quietly ask the second, "What was that?" He hesitates, then shows you. It's a poem, not scripture, not sermon, but longing. Her voice is a psalm, true her breath the wine, true, O Lord, forgive what thou designed. You look up. He's blushing furiously. It's not for anyone, he mutters. It's practice. You smile. Of what? He sighs. Being human. You leave the monastery with a strange ache in your chest. Even here, in the most sacred places, desire hums under the surface like a low note in a hymn. By the time you reach the next town, dusk has fallen. A group of students in ragged robes walk ahead of you, their laughter bouncing off the stone walls. You follow them into a dimly lit tavern near the university gates. This, you soon learn, is the intellectual underground of the Middle Ages. A world of students, scholars, and renegade thinkers who read what the church forbids. A bearded man stands on a table, shouting over the noise. If God didn't want us curious, he proclaims, he wouldn't have given us eyes! The crowd cheers. You sit beside a young scholar who's sketching something on a scrap of parchment. It's an anatomical drawing, delicate, almost reverent. It's for medicine, she says, noticing your look. Or that's what I'll tell the bishop if he asks. You ask how she learned anatomy. She smirks. Graves, she says simply. Cold teachers, but patient ones. It's shocking, yes, but you can't help admiring the defiance. For every rule, there's someone quietly breaking it in the name of understanding. Between rounds of all, the scholars trade jokes about forbidden texts. One quotes a line from the Roman de la Rose, that infamous French allegory, where love becomes both an art and a sin. They burned that one twice. Someone laughs. Didn't work. The third copy was in the bishop's own library. You imagine that library now. Rows of holy texts with a few scandalous scrolls hidden between psalms. The image makes you grin. A student beside you leans close. You know what's really dangerous? He whispers. Books that make you feel. You nod. It's the perfect summary of the age: emotion as heresy, curiosity as crime. Later, as the fire burns low, someone produces a tattered manuscript wrapped in cloth. The tavern falls quiet. It's the book of the night of the tower. The student explains. Written to teach young ladies virtue. He opens it, reads a passage aloud about how women should lower their eyes, walk modestly, never speak first. The crowd jeers. One girl climbs onto the bench, cup raised high, and shouts, "To the women who looked up anyway!" Laughter erupts, glasses clink, and for one bright moment, you feel the future flicker inside this smoky room. Because these scholars, half drunk, half excommunicated, are the bridge between the dark and the dawn. They're planting the seeds of the Renaissance, even if they don't know it yet. You fall asleep that night in a borrowed cot above the tavern. The floorboards creak with movement below. More laughter, more debate, maybe a stolen kiss. Your last thought before sleep is how strange it is that the same century that built cathedrals also built these hidden corners of defiance. Maybe that's what kept the world alive through the so-called Dark Ages, not purity, but persistence. Somewhere downstairs, someone begins to recite softly, half prayer, half poetry. The body is a scroll, the soul, a flame, each word forbidden, yet written all the same. And in that whispered line, the whole medieval world breathes again, fearful, curious, endlessly human. You wake to the smell of ink and old parchment still clinging to your hair, as if the words from last night followed you out of sleep. Morning light slants through the tavern shutters in narrow golden stripes, touching the dusty air, like a cathedral's glow filtered through owl. You step outside, and the road ahead hums with a quieter sort of life. No chanting monks now, no arguing scholars, just the city's heart beating in its shadowed corners. You turn toward the narrowest alleys, where the stones glisten faintly with spilled wine and secrets. This is where another world begins, the world of courtesans. They call it the Chamber of Sin. Though most of the people who say that have already visited one, the first thing you notice is the scent. It isn't perfume, not really. It's a blend of rose oil, tallow candles, and something faintly metallic, like coins rubbed too often between nervous fingers. A woman stands in the doorway of a timbered house, her hair pinned high, her sleeves bright with red embroidery. She sees you hesitate and smiles with the tired grace of someone who's seen every sort of man. "Traveler," she says, "don't look so nervous. You've wandered into the safest street in town." Her voice has the smooth rhythm of someone used to putting others at ease. She introduces herself as Sable, and before you can protest, she takes your arm and steers you into a softly lit room. The curtains are drawn, the air heavy with warmth. "You're not here for what they usually come for," she says, studying your clothes. "You've got a scholar's ink on your sleeve. You're here for stories." You nod, and she laughs softly. "Then you've come to the right place. We've been stories longer than the church has had prayers." She's right. The history of prostitution in the Middle Ages isn't written in royal decrees. It's whispered between sheets, traded in taverns, hidden in confessions. Every medieval town had its woman's quarter, often sanctioned by the same authorities, who preached against it. Even the church needed us, Sable says, pouring watered wine into a cup. Better a sinner you can see than a temptation hiding in the pews. It's not far from the truth. In many cities, Avignon, Paris, Venice, brothels were officially tolerated, even licensed, because they were thought to protect respectable women from men's wandering appetites. Sin, in this strange balance, became a kind of public service. Historians still argue whether it was pity or hypocrisy that kept such tolerance alive. Probably both. Why Sable motions toward a small altar in the corner, a wooden carving of Mary Magdalene, her painted eyes gentle but wary. "We'll light a candle to her every night," she says. She understands. In the half-light, you can see how everything in this room carries two meanings. The bed is both workplace and prison. The mirror is both vanity and armor. Even the laughter you hear from the next room sounds like a song hummed to keep loneliness away. Men come here for comfort. Your Sable continues. But they never understand that we do too. Sometimes we fall in love, though we never mean to. Sometimes we pray for the same thing they do. For someone to stay until morning. She tells you about her friend, a line, who fell for a night. He promised to return after a crusade, but sent only a single coin engraved with a cross. She wears it still. Yosabel says, like proof that sin can be holy if you love hard enough. Outside, a bell tolls noon. Through the shutter's gap, you catch a sliver of the street. Men laughing, women bargaining for fabric, a priest hurrying past with his eyes down. The world moves on, but inside, time feels slower. You ask Sable how she came here. She shrugs. I was married once. He died. The landlord wanted rent. The baker wanted coin. The church wanted obedience. I gave them what I could. She leans back, her expression unreadable. You'd be surprised how many widows live this life. The world gives us few choices, and all of them cost. Her honesty disarms you. Then, with a hint of pride, she adds, but don't pity us. Some of us run this town. We know who loves whom, who steals from the tithe, who whispers against the bishop. Knowledge is its own kind of freedom. And suddenly, you see it, these women are archivists of sin, librarians of the human heart. Their survival depends on reading people better than any scholar reads Latin. From the next room, laughter rises, warm, unforced, real. You peek in and see another woman playing dice with a group of guards. She wins, of course, and their curses turn to chuckles. A young girl, maybe 15, carries a tray of bread and fruit. Sable nods toward her. We try to keep them safe, teach them to read. The city won't. You realize this brothel, for all its dim lights and dangerous reputation, might be one of the few places where women have real community. But not everyone approves. That evening, as dusk spills violet over the rooftops, you hear a commotion in the square. A preacher stands on a crate, his voice sharp and furious.
These houses of shame,
he cries. They breed disease and damnation. His words crash against the crowd like stones. You see Yusabel at the window, arms folded watching. He's not wrong, she murmurs. But he's not right either. She looks at you. You know what I think damns people most? Pretending they've never wanted. You remember the abbess, whispering her prayers through tears. The monk writing love poems in secret. The peasant girl trading laughter for bread. She's right. Desire is the common thread running through them all. Later, after the preacher leaves and the street grows still, you walk with the Sable down to the river. The moon floats bright and round, mirrored in the ripples. She tosses a small coin into the water. For luck, you ask. For forgiveness, she says softly. Just in case, he's listening tonight. The sound of the coin hitting the surface is so small it barely registers. But the gesture lingers, fragile and human. You walk back through the sleeping streets, and for once, the city doesn't feel divided between saints and sinners. Just people, all aching in their own ways. When you reach the edge of town, you turn for one last look. In the upper window of Yosabel's house, a candle burns steady and low, not as an invitation, but as a reminder that sin and grace sometimes share the same flame. And as you move into the dark beyond the city walls, the night wind carries the faintest echo of her voice. Write it true, traveller. We were more than what they called us. Dawn rises soft and slow, brushing pale gold over the rooftops of another city. Bigger, louder, richer. The streets here are paved, the banners brighter, the gossip sharper. This isn't the world of peasants or pilgrims anymore. This is the world of royals. You move through the palace gates under the eyes of armored guards, their faces expressionless, but their ears always listening. The smell of roses and roasting meat fills the air. Inside, The great hall hums with whispers. Courtiers and servants gliding across marble like chess pieces. You're here to see how lust looks when wrapped in silk instead of straw. At first glance, everything sparkles. Gold-threaded tapestries, jeweled goblets. Candles dripping slow rivers of wax. But beneath the shimmer lies the same pulse you felt in the village tavern. The human heartbeat of want, envy, and fear. The queen enters first, her gown heavy with embroidery, her smile light as frost. Everyone bows, and the murmurs hush. Then the king arrives. A tall man with the wary look of someone who's tasted everything and found nothing sweet enough. They stand side by side, perfect and cold, a portrait of holy matrimony painted over cracks of scandal. Because behind every royal curtain in medieval Europe, there's a rumor. You overhear the servants whisper them like prayers. Quiet but relentless. A knight who lingers too long near the queen's balcony. A lady in waiting whose belly grows suspiciously round. A bishop who writes love letters for others, but hides one of his own. One woman, a laundress folding linens, chuckles as she speaks. They call it sin when we do it. When they do it, it's destiny. You can't argue with her. In truth, lust and politics were inseparable in the royal courts of the Middle Ages. Kings used marriages to seal alliances, and lovers to secure influence. Queens used affairs, real or rumored, to gather power of their own. Every bedroom was a battlefield, every kiss a contract. You find yourself in the queen's antechamber later that day, summoned under the pretense of recording her household accounts. But she isn't interested in numbers. She studies you through half-lowered lashes, her tone soft but edged. You've been traveling, haven't you? You've seen how the rest of the world sins. You nod cautiously. Good, she says. Then you know that virtue is a game played by the powerful. We write the rules, then break them quietly. Her words hang in the air, dangerous and thrilling. You've read about women like her. Eleanor of Aquitaine, Isabella of France, Catherine de Medici. Women who turned gossip into a weapon sharper than any blade. The queen gestures toward the window, where the courtyard below glows with evening torches. They think sin happens in the dark, she murmurs. But the most dangerous kind happens in daylight, when everyone's watching and pretending not to see. Just then, the door opens. A knight steps in, tall, sunburned, his armor still dusty from travel. The queen doesn't move, but something shifts in the air. He bows deeply. Your Majesty. Her voice stays calm, but her fingers tighten on the edge of the table. You return from Gascony. Yes, he says, eyes flicking briefly to hers. With your message safely delivered. A pause, a heartbeat, 1,000 unspoken things. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the tension dissolves. He turns and leaves. She exhales, barely audible. Every court has its secrets, she says, but the best ones are kept in silence. You write her words down later, knowing history will twist them. It always does. In France, King Philip IV once accused his daughter, in law, of adultery to secure political advantage, sparking the infamous Tour de Nesle affair. In England, rumours of Queen Anne Boleyn's sins helped justify her execution. Whether true or false, such stories shaped empires. Historians still argue which royal scandals were real and which were propaganda. But what's clear is that lust was never just about pleasure. It was about power. That evening, a grand feast fills the palace. Tables groan under the weight of roasted boar, sugared fruit, and silver pitchers of wine. Minstrels play softly in the gallery. The air smells of honey and heat. You sit near the servants' benches, where talk is freer. They gossip about who sits too close to whom, whose laughter lingers too long. You catch a glimpse of the queen across the hall, her smile perfect, her eyes distant. The knight stands behind the king's chair, pretending not to notice her. When the toasts begin, the king raises his cup. To virtue, he declares, The irony almost makes you choke on your bread. Later, as the feast spills into night, you wander the corridors lit by trembling torches. Somewhere behind a door, you hear laughter. The low, dangerous kind that doesn't belong to jokes. You don't linger. Instead, you find your way to the royal chapel, empty and echoing. Candles burn low, their wax pooling like tears. You kneel not to pray, but to think. The same hands that clasp in devotion also tremble in desire. The same lips that whisper prayers have kissed betrayal. And yet, somehow, the kingdom still stands. You wonder if that's faith, or just human stubbornness. Outside, rain begins to fall, tapping softly against stained glass. You imagine it washing through the palace. Over silk sheets, over stone floors, over all the whispered sins that history will half forget. When dawn comes again, you find the queen in the garden, alone. Her gown trails dew, her hair loose for once. She looks almost human. "Tell me," she says without turning. "When they write about us 100 years from now, what will they say?" You answer honestly. "They'll say you were dangerous." She smiles faintly. "Good." And in that moment, you understand for women like her. Power and sin were the same language, spoken differently depending on who was listening. As you leave the palace, the city below stirs awake. Bells ring, vendors shout, and the people gossip already about what they think happened behind those gilded doors. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe they're right. But either way, they'll keep whispering. Because in the medieval world, nothing traveled faster than rumor, except maybe desire. The road beyond the palace takes you farther from gold and closer to grime again. But the air feels freer. You've seen sin draped in velvet and crowned with rubies. Now it's time to see it baked into the bones of ordinary people. You travel south, past fields of barley and forgotten shrines, into towns where the church bells sound heavier, as if they're ringing for repentance that never comes. Your next stop, the monastery. It stands on a lonely hill, wrapped in fog and ivy. A bell tolls somewhere above, and the sound ripples through the still air like breath through sleep. You cross the courtyard and feel the hush settle around you. No laughter here, no songs. Just the soft scrape of sandals and the faint smell of incense and wax. A monk greets you, his face pale, eyes calm, hands folded within his sleeves. He speaks softly, his voice like a psalm. "Welcome, traveler. You've come seeking rest." "Yes," you answer, though rest is the last thing you're here for. He smiles faintly. Then you may find it, though not always in the way you expect. Inside, the monastery feels carved from silence. Hallways stretch long and shadowed. Candles flicker in niches, their flames small but steady. Murals of saints and angels line the walls, their eyes painted wide and sorrowful. You're offered bread, cheese, and ale. The monk's humble supper. You sit at the refectory table beside men who have taken vows of chastity, silence, and obedience. But as they bow their heads to pray, you can't help but notice the subtle tremor in one man's hand. The way another's gaze flicks too quickly toward a passing novice. They've given up the world, yes, but not what it means to be human. That night, in the cold dormitory, you lie awake on a straw mattress and listen to the creak of wood, the wind moaning through the rafters. Then you hear it. Soft footsteps, a door opening, closing again, a whisper, a rustle, then silence. You tell yourself it could be anything. A monk walking to pray, a door swinging on its hinge. But you know better. In medieval Europe, monasteries and convents were supposed to be sanctuaries of purity. Yet temptation doesn't respect walls. Even the holiest places hid secrets. Monks and nuns who broke their vows under the weight of loneliness. Priests who fathered children in secret. Abbesses who wielded power like queens behind cloistered gates. The next morning, you find one of the brothers tending the herb garden. He's young, too young to have sworn his life away. His eyes are shadowed, but his smile is kind. He asks quietly, "Do you ever wonder if sin is only what other people say it is?" You glance at him. "Why do you ask?" He shrugs, pulling a sprig of mint from the soil. "Because if love is a sin, then why does it feel holy?" His words hang between you like incense smoke. You don't answer. Later that day, the abbot preaches in the chapel. His sermon thunders about the dangers of lust, the devil in disguise, the corruption of the flesh, the eternal fires awaiting those who stray. His words echo off the stone walls, righteous and heavy. But as you watch his face in the candlelight, you see a shadow flicker there, something wary, something guilty. He speaks of purity, but his eyes won't meet yours. After Vespers, a confession line forms. You linger near the back, listening to murmurs in Latin, the sound of secrets being traded for forgiveness. When your turn comes, you kneel behind the screen. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." You say, though it's more observation than confession. "What troubles you, my child?" "Curiosity," you admit, "about how many of the sins confessed here are ever truly repented." Silence, then a sigh. "More than you'd think," he says quietly, "and fewer than I'd hope." When you rise, you notice a folded letter tucked beneath the confessional door. Wax seal, red. Someone's hidden it there. You shouldn't take it, but of course you do. Later, in your room, you break the seal. The letter is written in a delicate, flowing hand. "Forgive me, but I cannot bear the silence anymore. Every prayer I speak feels like a lie when my heart still burns for you. I know it is sin. I know it is damnation. And yet, when you walk past me in the cloister, I believe for a moment that even God must look away." There's no name, no signature, just longing pressed into ink. You burn the letter in your candle flame before dawn. Some truths are too dangerous to keep. When you leave the monastery, the morning mist clings to your cloak. The young monk from the garden stands by the gate. He looks at you, then at the horizon. "Tell the world," he says softly, "that holiness doesn't mean being without sin. It means fighting it, and sometimes failing." You nod. The gate's close behind you with a sound like final prayer. The path down the hill is steep and silent. You pass a small village where peasants haul water, bake bread, argue, flirt. Ordinary life continues, blissfully unaware of the hidden hearts inside cloisters and chapels. By the time you reach the valley, you realize something simple but profound: sin wasn't rare in the Middle Ages. It was the heartbeat of survival. The church thundered about purity, but people were flesh, and flesh always found its way. In London alone, by the 14th century, there were hundreds of known brothels, some run under the church's nose, some by its servants. Monks visited them, confessors blessed them, kings taxed them. And when plague or famine struck, even those who preached against sin found themselves kneeling before it. You wonder if the monks on the hill know that their prayers are whispered over a world that never stopped hungering. And perhaps, in some quiet way, they envy it. You wake before dawn, the chill biting at your fingertips, the sound of distant bells still echoing from the monastery you left behind. The road before you glows faintly in the half-light, leading toward the nearest town. A place where sin and piety seem to wrestle in the open square. The church looms larger now, not just as a building but as an idea. Everywhere you walk, its symbols stretch like roots beneath the cobblestones. Crosses carved on doors, saints painted on tavern walls, and yet behind every blessing there's a whispered curse. You arrive at a small town called St. Fleur. It's market day. The smell of roasted chestnuts and animal dung competes in the air. But beyond the stalls, you hear another kind of voice. Raw, commanding, trembling with fury. A preacher stands atop a wooden box in the square, face red with zeal, eyes like embers. His words lash the air. "Lust is the devil's noose!" It strangles the soul, tempts the righteous, and opens the gates of hell itself. People stop to listen. Some cross themselves. Others smirk, pretending not to care, though they linger anyway. His voice is impossible to ignore. You edge closer. The man slams a Bible shut and points toward the crowd. Even now, who among you comes pure to confession? Who among you has not lain in sin, not imagined the pleasures of flesh, not broken God's sacred laws in secret? A murmur ripples through the onlookers. You see a baker's wife look away, a young man bite his lip, a child tug at his mother's sleeve. Then the preacher produces something from beneath his cloak, a wooden carving of a human body, charred black. "This," he cries, "is what remains of those who serve lost." You realize what he's holding's a burned effigy from a recent execution. Someone, perhaps a woman accused of temptation or witchcraft, was burned, and now her likeness is paraded as a warning. The crowd shifts uneasily. Medieval Europe had a complicated relationship with punishment. The church often used spectacle to teach morality. The execution square was as much theatre as terror. You recall a true fact: in 1252, Pope Innocent IV formally approved the use of torture in inquisitions. Because pain, it was believed, could cleanse lies and purify souls. The preacher pounds his fist.
The wages of sin are eternal fire! The body is weak, the soul must triumph!
Remember Sodom. Remember Gomorrah. Remember the wages of unrepentant flesh. But as his voice rises, you notice something strange. His gaze keeps darting toward a woman near the front. She's young, veiled, her hands folded demurely. Yet her eyes never leave him. There's something charged between them, invisible but unmistakable. When the sermon ends, people disperse, some muttering, "Amen," others rolling their eyes. You linger long enough to see the preacher slip into the church, and moments later, the veiled woman follow through a side door. Curiosity nudges you. You circle around the building. Behind the stone apse, a narrow window glows faintly. You shouldn't look, but you do. Inside, you glimpse the preacher and the woman standing too close, their heads bowed, their hands brushing as they whisper. Her veil trembles. His jaw tightens. So much for purity. Historians still argue whether medieval priests were more sinful than their flocks or simply more scrutinized. But stories like these filled court records and town gossip alike. Secret affairs, illegitimate children, bribes to keep confessions quiet. It was all part of the holy machinery. You leave them to their hypocrisy and wander through the town. Outside the tavern, two men debate loudly. "The bishop says lust brings plague," one declares. "That's nonsense," says the other. "If sin caused sickness, no one in Paris would still be breathing." You laugh under your breath. Medieval people often linked morality and disease. The Black Death, some preachers claimed, was God's punishment for sexual immorality. Others insisted it came from bad air, or alignment of the stars, or simply the will of fate. Whatever the cause, fear sold sermons faster than forgiveness. That evening, as the sun sets, you find yourself inside the church again, not for prayer, but for shelter. The air smells of incense and candle wax. Shadows stretch across the pews like fingers. A confession booth creaks open nearby. Someone slips inside, then silence. You take a seat at the back, half dozing, until a different sound wakes you. Footsteps, hurried and soft. The preacher again. He's pacing near the altar, muttering to himself. Temptation is everywhere. Even the blessed are not safe. He kneels, trembling. "Lord, take this burden from me." But you see his hand clutching something. Her veil. The one he swore to avoid. It's a strange thing, watching holiness unravel. The next morning, the preacher is gone. Vanished. Some say he fled. Others whisper that he was taken by the Inquisition itself. Either way, the square feels quieter, as if his fire burned out too soon. As you leave Saint Fleur, you pass a wagon filled with scrolls, old church decrees being carried to the cathedral. One parchment flutters loose and lands at your feet. You catch it. It's a list of banned behaviors: dancing in mixed company, sleeping two to a bed in inns, women revealing their hair during mass, men kissing in greeting. Each sin feels almost laughably human. You roll the parchment and tuck it into your pack. The church may strike back, you think, but the body always finds a way to win. As the road curves toward the horizon, you hear another bell toll in another town, another sermon about purity, another punishment waiting to happen. But you've learned something: the church never quite understood fear. Might silence a heart for a while, but it never kills desire. The same monks who fasted dreamed of feasts. The same priests who condemned lust whispered prayers for the ones they loved. And perhaps, somewhere deep down, even the saints envied sinners for feeling alive. The road stretches east now, toward the great pilgrim roads, those winding arteries of medieval Europe where faith and flesh walked side by side. You join a crowd of travellers heading for Canterbury, their staffs clicking in rhythm on the dirt road, their songs rising like the hum of bees in spring. At first, it feels noble. Pilgrims wear badges and scallop shells, marks of holy purpose. Some carry relics, others charms to ward off thieves or temptation. But after a few days on the road, the illusion of sanctity starts to crumble. You realize that the path to heaven is paved with more than prayers. It's paved with gossip, wine, blisters, and questionable choices made under moonlight. That evening, you stop at an inn called the Swan and Serpent. Its sign creaks in the wind, the serpent coiled around the bird, as if warning it not to trust its own purity. The common room is crowded with pilgrims, dozens of them, dusty and loud, drinking ale as if trying to drown their holiness. You sit near the hearth. The woman next to you, dressed in a brown cloak, grins when she catches your eye. "First pilgrimage?" she asks. You nod. She leans closer, her voice low. "Don't worry, the road absolves all sins. At least that's what the friars tell us, when they're not sinning themselves." She laughs, and you realize she's not joking. Pilgrimage, in the Middle Ages, was a strange hybrid of faith and freedom. It was the one time even peasants could travel far from home without suspicion. Men and women walked together, slept in shared barns, and confessed their sins to priests, who often joined them for a drink afterward. You remember reading about a bishop who once complained that pilgrim roads were dens of licentiousness and false relics. Historians still argue whether that was moral panic or accurate observation. But you suspect he wasn't entirely wrong. Later that night, the inn quiets down. You step outside to breathe. The stars feel close enough to touch, and the fields hum with crickets. Someone laughs softly behind you. It's the same woman. She holds a small flask. Want some? You accept. The liquid burns. A mix of wine and herbs. She tells you her name is Eloise. She's walking to Canterbury to pray for her husband's soul. Was he a good man? You ask. She shrugs. He was a man. You both laugh quietly. Then she adds, "He cheated. I cheated. God can sort it out." It's such a simple statement. Honest in a way most sermons aren't. The next day, you walk together. Along the path, you meet others: a friar who flirts with every woman he blesses, a merchant's son who carries a fake relic, supposedly a feather from an angel's wing, two nuns who walk barefoot as penance, whispering jokes that would make a bishop faint. You start to see how the church's grip loosens on the open road. People shed their hometown reputations like old cloaks. A miller's wife can become a saint here. A knight can drink with beggars and confess things he'd never say to his confessor. That night, you stop at another inn, this one by a river. The innkeeper, a broad woman with a scar across her cheek, warns everyone, keep your purses close and your hearts closed. The road's full of thieves, some of them dressed like monks. Inside, the atmosphere crackles. Music, dice, dancing. Someone passes around a lute. The friar from before plays a bawdy tune, and half the room joins in. Eloise leans close. See, pilgrims sin more in a week than townsfolk do in a year. You grin. And yet they still think they're earning salvation. Maybe they are, she says softly. Maybe joy counts, too. A lovely thought. Dangerous, but lovely. In the corner, an argument breaks out. A merchant accuses a woman of stealing his purse. She denies it. Voices rise, and then someone yells, "Search her!" The friar intervenes, raising his hands. Peace, brothers and sisters. Remember, we walk for God's mercy. But when the merchant storms off, you see the friar slip the stolen purse into his own robe. You look at him. He winks. The Lord provides, he says, and strolls away. That's the medieval church in miniature, corruption in the robe, faith on the tongue. The following morning, you cross a meadow dotted with shrines. People kneel before wooden crosses, muttering prayers. Others leave coins, hair ribbons, even apples. But behind one shrine, you find a more curious offering, a small pouch tied with silk. Inside is a clump of hair and a dried rose petal, a love charm. The line between devotion and desire blurs so easily. By midday, you reach a bridge where a group of pilgrims has stopped to rest. Someone tells a story about Saint Mary Magdalene, how she was both sinner and saint, how men feared her beauty as much as they adored her repentance. Historians still argue whether Magdalene was ever meant to symbolize lust redeemed, or simply became convenient shorthand for it. Either way, her legend made sure women's bodies remained the church's favorite battlefield. You walk until the soles of your shoes split. That night, you and Eloise camp by a small chapel ruin. Fireflies drift over the grass like sparks from invisible candles. She hums a hymn, then says, "You know, when I was young, I thought sin was something you did. Now I think it's just what you feel and can't admit." You lie awake after she falls asleep, staring at the sky. She might be right. When dawn comes, you see the spires of Canterbury rising ahead. Pilgrims kneel, weep, cross themselves. Some kiss the ground. Some simply sigh. Inside the cathedral, you light a candle. The air glows golden dust, thick. You whisper no prayer, just breathe. And as you watch the flames flicker, you realize something the church never could control. Every pilgrimage was a mirror. People came to wash away sin, but all they ever found was themselves. The road stretches east now, toward the great pilgrim routes, those winding arteries of medieval Europe, where faith and flesh walked side by side. You join a crowd of travelers heading for Canterbury, their staffs clicking in rhythm on the dirt road, their songs rising like the hum of bees in spring. At first, it feels noble. Pilgrims wear badges and scallop shells, marks of holy purpose. Some carry relics, others charms to ward off thieves or temptation. But after a few days on the road, the illusion of sanctity starts to crumble. You realize that the path to heaven is paved with more than prayers. It's paved with gossip, wine, blisters, and questionable choices made under moonlight. That evening, you stop at an inn called the Swan and Serpent. Its sign creaks in the wind, the serpent coiled around the bird, as if warning it not to trust its own purity. The common room is crowded with pilgrims, dozens of them, dusty and loud, drinking ale as if trying to drown their holiness. You sit near the hearth. The woman next to you, dressed in a brown cloak, grins when she catches your eye. "First pilgrimage?" she asks. You nod. She leans closer, her voice low. "Don't worry. The road absolves all sins. At least that's what the friars tell us, when they're not sinning themselves." She laughs, and you realize she's not joking. Pilgrimage, in the Middle Ages, was a strange hybrid of faith and freedom. It was the one time even peasants could travel far from home without suspicion. Men and women walked together, slept in shared barns, and confessed their sins to priests who often joined them for a drink afterward. You remember reading about a bishop who once complained that pilgrim roads were dens of licentiousness and false relics. Historians still argue whether that was moral panic or accurate observation. But you suspect he wasn't entirely wrong. Later that night, the inn quiets down. You step outside to breathe. The stars feel close enough to touch, and the fields hum with crickets. Someone laughs softly behind you. It's the same woman. She holds a small flask. Want some? You accept. The liquid burns, a mix of wine and herbs. She tells you her name is Eloise. She's walking to Canterbury to pray for her husband's soul. Was he a good man? You ask. She shrugs. He was a man. You both laugh quietly. Then she adds, I cheated. God can sort it out. It's such a simple statement. Honest in a way most sermons aren't. The next day you walk together. Along the path, you meet others, a friar who flirts with every woman he blesses, a merchant's son who carries a fake relic, supposedly a feather from an angel's wing. Two nuns who walk barefoot as penance, whispering jokes that would make a bishop faint. You start to see how the church's grip loosens on the open road. People shed their hometown reputations like old cloaks. A miller's wife can become a saint here. A knight can drink with beggars and confess things he'd never say to his confessor. That night, you stop at another inn, this one by a river. The innkeeper, a broad woman with a scar across her cheek, warns everyone, keep your purses close and your hearts closed. The road's full of thieves, some of them dressed like monks. Inside, the atmosphere crackles. Music, dice, dancing. Someone passes around a lute. The friar from before plays a bawdy tune, and half the room joins in. Eloise leans close. See, pilgrims sin more in a week than townsfolk do in a year. You grin. And yet they still think they're earning salvation. Maybe they are, she says softly. Maybe joy counts, too. A lovely thought. Dangerous, but lovely. In the corner, an argument breaks out. A merchant accuses a woman of stealing his purse. She denies it. Voices rise, and then someone yells, "Search her!" The friar intervenes, raising his hands. Peace, brothers and sisters. Remember, we walk for God's mercy. But when the merchant storms off, you see the friar slip the stolen purse into his own robe. You look at him. He winks. The Lord provides, he says, and strolls away. That's the medieval church in miniature, corruption in the robe, faith on the tongue. The following morning, you cross a meadow dotted with shrines. People kneel before wooden crosses, muttering prayers. Others leave coins, hair ribbons, even apples. But behind one shrine, you find a more curious offering. A small pouch tied with silk. Inside is a clump of hair and a dried rose petal, a love charm. The line between devotion and desire blurs so easily. By midday, you reach a bridge where a group of pilgrims has stopped to rest. Someone tells a story about Saint Mary Magdalene, how she was both sinner and saint, how men feared her beauty as much as they adored her repentance. Historians still argue whether Magdalene was ever meant to symbolize lust redeemed or simply became convenient shorthand for it. Either way, her legend made sure women's bodies remained the church's favorite battlefield. You walk until the soles of your shoes split. That night, you and Eloise camp by a small chapel ruin. Fireflies drift over the grass like sparks from invisible candles. She hums a hymn, then says, "You know, when I was young, I thought sin was something you did. Now I think it's just what you feel and can't admit." You lie awake after she falls asleep, staring at the sky. She might be right. When dawn comes, you see the spires of Canterbury rising ahead. Pilgrims kneel, weep, cross themselves. Some kiss the ground, some simply sigh. Inside the cathedral, you light a candle. The air glows gold and dust thick. You whisper no prayer, just breathe. And as you watch the flames flicker, you realize something the church never could control. Every pilgrimage was a mirror. People came to wash away sin, but all they ever found was themselves. The road stretches east now, toward the great pilgrim routes, those winding arteries of medieval Europe, where faith and flesh walked side by side. You join a crowd of travelers heading for Canterbury, their staffs clicking in rhythm on the dirt road, their songs rising like the hum of bees in spring. At first, it feels noble. Pilgrims wear badges and scallop shells, marks of holy purpose. Some carry relics, others charms to ward off thieves or temptation. But after a few days on the road, the illusion of sanctity starts to crumble. You realize that the path to heaven is paved with more than prayers. It's paved with gossip, wine blisters, unquestionable choices made under moonlight. That evening, you stop at an inn called the Swan and Serpent. Its sign creaks in the wind, the serpent coiled around the bird, as if warning it not to trust its own purity. The common room is crowded with pilgrims, dozens of them, dusty and loud, drinking ale as if trying to drown their holiness. You sit near the hearth. The woman next to you, dressed in a brown cloak, grins when she catches your eye. "First pilgrimage?" she asks. You nod. She leans closer, her voice low. "Don't worry, the road absolves all sins. At least that's what the friars tell us, when they're not sinning themselves." She laughs, and you realize she's not joking. Pilgrimage, in the Middle Ages, was a strange hybrid of faith and freedom. It was the one time even peasants could travel far from home without suspicion. Men and women walked together, slept in shared barns, and confessed their sins to priests who often joined them for a drink afterward. You remember reading about a bishop who once complained that pilgrim roads were dens of licentiousness and false relics. Historians still argue whether that was moral panic or accurate observation, but you suspect he wasn't entirely wrong. Later that night, the inn quiets down. You step outside to breathe. The stars feel close enough to touch, and the fields hum with crickets. Someone laughs softly behind you. It's the same woman. She holds a small flask. Want some? You accept. The liquid burns, a mix of wine and herbs. She tells you her name is Eloise. She's walking to Canterbury to pray for her husband's soul. Was he a good man? You ask. She shrugs. He was a man. You both laugh quietly. Then she adds, I cheated. God can sort it out. It's such a simple statement. Honest in a way most sermons aren't. The next day, you walk together. Along the path, you meet others, a friar who flirts with every woman he blesses, a merchant's son who carries a fake relic, supposedly a feather from an angel's wing, two nuns who walk barefoot as penance, whispering jokes that would make a bishop faint. You start to see how the church's grip loosens on the open road. People shed their hometown reputations like old cloaks. A miller's wife can become a saint here. A knight can drink with beggars and confess things he'd never say to his confessor. That night, you stop at another inn, this one by a river. The innkeeper, a broad woman with a scar across her cheek, warns everyone, keep your purses close and your hearts closed. The road's full of thieves, some of them dressed like monks. Inside, the atmosphere crackles. Music, dice, dancing. Someone passes around a lute. The friar from before plays a bawdy tune, and half the room joins in. Eloise leans close. See, pilgrims sin more in a week than townsfolk do in a year. You grin. And yet they still think they're earning salvation. Maybe they are, she says softly. Maybe joy counts too. A lovely thought. Dangerous, but lovely. In the corner, an argument breaks out. A merchant accuses a woman of stealing his purse. She denies it. Voices rise, and then someone yells, "Search her!" The friar intervenes, raising his hands. "Peace, brothers and sisters. Remember, we walk for God's mercy." But when the merchant storms off, you see the friar slip the stolen purse into his own robe. You look at him. He winks. "The Lord provides," he says, and strolls away. That's the medieval church in miniature, corruption in the robe, faith on the tongue. The following morning, you cross a meadow dotted with shrines. People kneel before wooden crosses, muttering prayers. Others leave coins, hair ribbons, even apples. But behind one shrine, you find a more curious offering, a small pouch tied with silk. Inside is a clump of hair and a dried rose petal, a love charm. The line between devotion and desire blurs so easily. By midday, you reach a bridge where a group of pilgrims has stopped to rest. Someone tells a story about Saint Mary Magdalene. How she was both sinner and saint. How men feared her beauty as much as they adored her repentance. Historians still argue whether Magdalene was ever meant to symbolize lust redeemed or simply became convenient shorthand for it. Either way, her legend made sure women's bodies remained the church's favorite battlefield. You walk until the soles of your shoes split. That night, you and Eloy's camp by a small chapel ruin. Fireflies drift over the grass like sparks from invisible candles. She hums a hymn, then says, "You know, when I was young, I thought sin was something you did. Now I think it's just what you feel and can't admit." You lie awake after she falls asleep, staring at the sky. She might be right. When dawn comes, you see the spires of Canterbury rising ahead. Pilgrims kneel, weep, cross themselves. Some kiss the ground. Some simply sigh. Inside the cathedral, you light a candle. The air glows gold and dust thick. You whisper no prayer, just breathe. And as you watch the flames flicker, you realize something the church never could control. Every pilgrimage was a mirror. People came to wash away sin, but all they ever found was themselves. The cathedral fades behind you as you follow a narrow road lined with hemlock and wild thyme. The air smells sharper here, cleaner, though you can't quite tell if it's from the herbs or the knowledge that you're walking toward a different kind of sin. The scientific kind, because before love became poetry, before lust became art, it was chemistry, or at least, what medieval physicians thought was chemistry. You reach the edge of a walled town known for its university. It's smaller than you expect. Stone towers, slanted roofs, and courtyards crowded with young scholars in wool cloaks, scribbling Latin notes about everything from salvation to sweat. You slip into a lecture hall that smells like ink and boiled cabbage. The physician at the front is tall and serious, his beard divided neatly in two. He speaks in that slow, self-assured rhythm that men adopt when they think they're explaining how the universe works. The body, he declares, is a vessel of humors. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Balance them, and you have virtue. Unbalance them, he pauses for dramatic effect, and you have lust. You sit in the back, biting back a smile. According to Galenic medicine, the ancient framework medieval doctors swore by, sexual desire was literally a bodily fluid problem. Too much heat in the blood, they said, caused passion. Too much cold, and the heart froze. The doctor continues, a man with excess blood becomes rash and carnal. A woman overheated by summer air becomes a danger to herself and others. He gestures toward the notes chalked behind him remedies. Lettuce, cold baths, abstinence. You picture some poor soul dunking himself in a freezing pond, praying the temperature will cure him of wanting. You have to stifle a laugh. When the lecture ends, you drift through the campus gardens. Students debate near a fountain. One young man reads aloud from a banned Arabic text about love potions and perfumes. They say a mixture of ambergris and honey, worn behind the ear, can summon affection, he says. His friend snorts. Only if you smell like money. Historians still argue how deeply medieval Europe absorbed Arabic medical ideas. But there's no denying they borrowed plenty. From surgical instruments to formulas for aphrodisiacs. You pass a small apothecary, its shelves stacked with jars labeled in Latin ruta, salvia, mandragora. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with quick eyes, beckons you closer. looking for a cure, traveler. Or a cause. You raise a brow. A cause. She grins. Some come to calm desire. Others come to wake it. She offers 2 vials. One greenish and cool, smelling. Will chill your humors. The other, red and syrupy, will stir them. You buy neither, but she seems amused by your hesitation. Don't worry, she says. You'll find your own medicine soon enough. Everyone does. Outside, a bell tolls from the medical college tower. Students scatter to prayers. You wander toward the river, where barbers, half doctors, half executioners, wash their blades. One of them waves a bloodied rag in greeting. Need your humors balanced. He jokes. You politely decline. In the tavern that night, you sit beside 2 scholars arguing over a chicken leg. The church forbids lust, says one. But does it forbid desire between husband and wife? Of course not, says the other. As long as it's for procreation, not pleasure. The first scholar rolls his eyes. Ah, so if she gets pregnant, it's holy. If she doesn't, it's hell. They laugh, but their laughter sounds nervous. For all its supposed wisdom, medieval medicine was obsessed with controlling the body, especially the female body. Women were thought to be colder and wetter than men, driven by imbalance rather than intent. Desire was considered a malfunction, not a choice. And yet, midwives, herbalists, and wise women knew differently. You meet one the next morning, a midwife named Agnes, her apron stained with herbs. She's treating a young girl pale with fear. She's got too much heat, Agnes mutters. Not in her blood, but in her heart. She hands the girl a small pouch of lavender and sage. Sleep. Don't fight yourself too hard. You'll only sweat the sickness in deeper. You ask her later what she meant. Desire's not the disease, she says. Shame is. Her words hit harder than any sermon. As you travel on, you notice how medicine and morality start to blur together. A doctor prescribes cold baths for lust, and a priest calls it penance. A midwife mixes herbs for comfort, and a bishop calls it witchcraft. And somewhere in between, real people simply try to live. You pause near a wayside chapel, where pilgrims drink from a healing spring. The water tastes like iron and moss. A plaque claims it cures impure thoughts. Judging by the giggling couples nearby, it doesn't. That night, under a full moon, you watch the river shimmer silver. A musician strums a lute beside the inn's doorway. His song is old, perhaps older than the church itself, about a girl who fell in love with a healer, and how every cure he gave her only made her heart ache more. You realize that the medieval mind never separated sin from sickness. Everything, from lust to laughter, was an imbalance to be corrected. Yet, somehow, humanity kept refusing the cure. The next morning, as you pack your things, you find the 2 vials the apothecary offered tucked into your satchel. You don't remember taking them, but there they are. The green and the red, temptation and restraint. You hold them up to the light. The colors bleed into each other. Maybe, you think, balance was never the point. Maybe the point was learning how to live with the heat. You follow the road toward a cathedral town famous for its artists, men who painted heaven and hell with equal devotion. The smell of pigment and candle smoke clings to the air as you enter a narrow alley filled with workshops. Inside, you hear the scrape of brushes against plaster and the murmur of prayer blended with paint. Here, sin isn't scolded, it's illustrated. You step through a doorway into one of the studios. A young apprentice, smudged with ochre, looks up from his work. Careful, he warns. The devils are still drying. You glance at the wall and flinch involuntarily. The fresco before you is a chaos of flame and writhing limbs. Souls tumbling into the open jaws of a monstrous beast, its teeth like church spires. Lustful sinners are painted naked, clutching one another even as fire licks at their feet. Angels hover above, serene and pale. holding scrolls that list their crimes: adulterers, fornicators, temptresses. The artist himself, a thin man with ink on his hands, turns from his palette and studies you. You see, he says softly, the body is both the prison and the proof. He dips his brush into red pigment. Every stroke is a sermon. Paint a sin vividly enough, and perhaps someone out there will resist committing it. But you notice his hand trembles slightly. Maybe it's exhaustion, or guilt. Medieval art, you realize, wasn't subtle. It didn't whisper about morality, it shouted. Hell was painted in lurid detail, not just to scare peasants, but to remind even nobles that lust burned hotter than any forge. Historians still argue, the artist says without prompting, whether these paintings taught people faith or simply fear. You nod. It's hard to tell the difference when salvation is sold in pictures. He gestures for you to follow him upstairs. The room above is quieter, lighter. On the walls, half-finished angels tilt their heads toward heaven. Their faces are soft, almost human. One angel, though, seems different. Her lips parted just slightly, her gaze too alive. That one. You say, she looks real. The artist smiles faintly. She is. Or was. He doesn't elaborate, but you notice a ring hanging from a nail beside the painting. A simple silver band, worn smooth. You don't ask whose it is. You don't need to. When you leave, the scent of paint lingers like incense on your clothes. Outside, the bells toll for vespers. You join the townspeople in the cathedral square. A preacher stands before the gates, his voice low and heavy. Those who sin with the body sin twice, once in pleasure, once in memory. His words echo through the crowd. You look up at the massive stone carvings above the door, angels and demons frozen mid-battle, carved so long ago that the edges of their wings have weathered smooth. Inside, the stained glass glows like liquid fire. Each window tells a story. Creation, temptation, damnation. The colors pulse as if alive. You notice one particular panel showing Eve offering the apple. But look closer. The serpent's face isn't reptilian at all. It's eerily human. A subtle warning, or a confession. Medieval churches loved to blend moral lesson with human fear. Painters, sculptors, and builders worked together to turn theology into theater. For the illiterate, stained glass was scripture. For the guilty, it was a mirror. You wander deeper. Near the altar, a painting of the Last Judgment stretches from floor to ceiling. Christ in the center, serene and glowing. Below him, sinners tumble downward into chaos. Among them, a bishop and a nun locked in an eternal embrace. Their faces twisted not in pain, but in something disturbingly like ecstasy. You stand there for a long time. A woman beside you murmurs, "We're told that love like that damns the soul." But I think the painter knew better. Her voice fades before you can see her face. Later that night, you walk through the graveyard behind the cathedral. Candles flicker in small lanterns left by mourners. The wind rustles through the grass, whispering the names carved in Latin. You stop at a tomb shaped like a heart cracked in two. The inscription reads, "She prayed for mercy. He painted it." A fitting epitaph for the age. The next morning, you visit a nearby manuscript workshop. Inside, monks bend over pages of parchment, illustrating psalters and prayer books. Their quills scratch softly. But amid the gold, leaf halos, and saintly faces, you spot something odd. A margin doodle of two rabbits kissing under a tree, a monk peeking at them from behind a bush. The artist, noticing your amusement, smiles. "Even holiness gets bored," he says. Medieval margins were notorious for mischief. Tiny jokes and hidden images slipped into holy texts. Some were playful, others scandalous. Cats playing harps, naked angels doing handstands, a nun milking a phallic-looking tree. You chuckle quietly. "Not very holy. Holier than fear," the monk replies. Laughter keeps the devil from taking himself too seriously. You leave with that thought ringing in your ears. That evening, as dusk pools over the rooftops. You watch a group of apprentices gather in the square to perform a morality play. Wooden stage, painted backdrops, torches hissing in the breeze. The story is simple: a young man tempted by lust must choose between the Virgin Mary and a demoness in red. The actors play it with wild enthusiasm. The audience gasps and cheers. When the young man finally kneels in repentance, the crowd claps, but not because they believe. They just love a good ending. The line between sin and art blurs again. As you walk away, you look back once more at the painted devils, the carved temptresses, the glowing saints. You realize that medieval Europe never hid its obsessions. It immortalized them. Every chapel, every fresco, every illuminated page was an argument between desire and damnation carved in stone. You think of the artist's trembling hand, of the angel's too, human face, and wonder if salvation was ever really the point. Or if these men simply wanted to make beauty last longer than sin could. After all, you muse. Art is the one confession that never burns. You leave the cathedral town behind and follow a narrow dirt road toward the countryside, where silence reigns thicker than incense. The road twists through wheat fields and low, misty valleys, past cottages with thatched roofs and small wooden shrines nailed to trees. Each shrine bears the carved figure of a saint, some kind, faced, others grim, holding up crosses against unseen dangers. This is the quieter side of medieval life, where sin hides not in taverns or brothels, but behind shuttered windows and whispered prayers. You come to a village so small it doesn't seem to have a name. Chickens wander the main path, and the air smells faintly of smoke and sheep's wool. You hear a church bell ring once, then stop, as if embarrassed to make noise. An old woman selling apples calls out, "You look like a traveler in need of a warning." You stop, smile politely, and ask what she means. "Confession," she says. "Don't make it here unless you want the whole village talking about what you did." You laugh, but she's serious. In these tiny parishes, confession isn't private, it's performance. The priest may be holy, but the villagers, they've got better ears than angels. You thank her, buy an apple, and move on. Inside the small stone church, the walls are bare except for one wooden carving of Mary and the Christ child. Yet even that figure seems heavy with human longing. Mary's face isn't serene. It's sorrowful, her eyes downcast not in humility, but exhaustion. You sit in the pews for a while, letting your eyes adjust to the gloom. A priest appears from behind the altar curtain, startled to see you. "Another soul come for absolution?" he asks softly. You shake your head. "Just resting." He nods, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "Then rest. The world is already loud enough with regret." You notice his hands as he folds them. Scarred, rough from work, not the delicate fingers of a scholar. "Do you ever confess?" you ask him. He hesitates. "We all do. Just not always aloud." That night, you stay in the parish guest house, a low stone building that smells faintly of hay. You share supper with a group of travelers, a widow on her way to market, a merchant with a limp, and a silent young monk who eats like he hasn't seen bread in days. The merchant tells a story about a nobler woman who confessed her affair with a stable boy. The priest absolved her, then married her off to his cousin for a bribe. Everyone laughs, except the monk. He looks up sharply, eyes dark with disapproval. "Lust is the root of corruption," he says, his voice cold. "It poisons the soul before it poisons the flesh." The widow sighs. "So does loneliness." "Father." The monk looks away. After supper, you lie awake listening to the wind through the shutters. Somewhere beyond the hills, a wolf howls. You think about the priest's scarred hands, the widow's soft defiance, and the strange ways people chase redemption. When morning comes, the monk is gone. The widow leaves you a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. You continue your walk toward a nearby abbey. one rumored to have once housed a scandal so great the church tried to erase it. The abbey rises from the mist like a fortress of silence. Its grey stones gleam faintly with dew. You step through the gates, half expecting an angel with a ledger to stop you, but no one does. Inside, nuns move like shadows, their footsteps muffled on the stone floor. You're greeted by the abbess, a woman whose age is hard to guess. Her voice is young, but her eyes are centuries old. "You've come to learn," she says. Not asking, you nod. Then know this chastity is not the absence of desire. It's the wrestling of it. She leads you through the cloister garden, where roses bloom next to thorny vines. We are told to root out temptation. She continues, but even weeds have flowers. You ask about the scandal. Her lips twitch. Historians still argue whether it ever truly happened. They say one of our sisters bore a child from a vision. You raise an eyebrow. She claimed an angel visited her, the abbess explains. Others whispered it was the priest who heard her confessions. The truth, buried somewhere under the altar, perhaps. The abbess smiles faintly, not cruelly but knowingly. Faith and flesh are harder to separate than parchment and ink. Later, in the scriptorium, you watch nuns illuminating texts by candlelight. One hums softly, her quill dancing across the page. You glance over her shoulder. She's painting the Song of Songs. The verses shimmer in gold leaf. "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for thy love is better than wine." You look at her, and she whispers, "It's scripture." We're allowed, indeed, the Song of Songs. An unabashedly sensual poem, was part of the Bible itself, read by monks and nuns who claim to see divine love in every kiss and caress. Medieval theologians spent entire careers debating whether it described God's love for the soul or something far more earthly. You wonder how many of them secretly hoped it meant both. Before leaving, you pass a small locked chamber. The abbess notices your curiosity. "That room," she says, "holds confessions that were never heard. Letters, drawings, small sins that never found an ear." She touches the key at her belt. We keep them, not to hide them, but to remind ourselves temptation doesn't vanish. It changes its clothes. When you step back into the sunlight, the world feels strangely quiet. The air smells of ink and flowers. You realize you've spent an entire day in a place built on silence, yet filled with the echoes of every unsaid desire. Down the road, you meet a pilgrim walking barefoot, dust coating his legs. He carries no relic, no rosary, just a small wooden carving of Eve. You ask why he carries her instead of a saint. "She was the first to want," he replies. "Without her, none of us would have learned what longing means." You watch him go, the carving swinging from his hand, and think about all the paintings, sermons, and prayers you've witnessed on this long journey. Maybe, you muse, sin isn't the opposite of holiness. Maybe it's just the shadow that proves the light exists. As twilight gathers, you reach a ridge overlooking the valley. A soft golden haze settles over the fields. Somewhere far below, the bells of the abbey begin to ring. You close your eyes. The sound is gentle, forgiving. For a moment, you imagine every sinner you've met. Every brothel keeper, painter monk, and widow, standing together under the same fading sun. Their stories intertwined like the vines on the cloister wall. History remembers their sins. You, tonight, remember their humanity. You follow the road as it bends toward the sea. The air grows saltier, the wind cooler, and the clouds smear across the sky like a slow, moving tide. The medieval world is nearly behind you now, but its echoes linger. Whispers of sermons, laughter from taverns, the scratch of quills, and the rhythm of distant bells. By dusk, you reach a small coastal town, clinging to the edge of a cliff. Fishermen haul nets ashore, their hands rough and red from the cold water. Children chase each other between barrels of salted cod, and above it all, on the highest bluff, stands a crumbling monastery half swallowed by ivy. The locals tell you no monks live there anymore, only ghosts and wind. But of course, you climb the hill anyway. Inside, the monastery smells of damp stone and forgotten prayers. The roof has collapsed in places, letting streaks of orange light spill onto the floor. Broken pews lie scattered like bones. You find a small chapel, still intact. Its altar blackened by centuries of candle smoke. And there, scratched faintly into the wall behind it, are words in Latin, half erased, but legible enough to make you pause amor peccatum non est, nisi oblivio Dei. Love is not a sin, unless it forgets God. You trace the letters with your fingertips, feeling how uneven the stone is. Whoever carved this didn't do it for art. They did it for absolution. You imagine the monk or nun who once knelt here, heart torn between devotion and desire. Maybe they'd fallen in love, truly, helplessly, and had nowhere else to put it but into stone. Historians still argue whether such inscriptions were acts of rebellion or of faith. You whisper to yourself, maybe they were both. You walk through the cloister's ruins. A single column remains standing, covered in climbing vines. Birds have nested in its hollow top. You sit beside it, the ocean murmuring far below, and listen to the wind whistle through the broken arches. It almost sounds like breathing. You think about the lives that filled these walls, the novices who took vows too young to understand them, the confessors who knew everyone's secrets, but never shared their own, the artists who painted saints with the faces of their lovers. You think about how medieval people feared sin, but couldn't stop talking about it, singing about it, drawing it, turning it into art, into legend, into warning. You realize that, for all their rules, they were never truly trying to kill desire. They were trying to control it, to build walls high enough that passion wouldn't burn everything down. But of course, it always did. The sea roars below, restless and infinite, just like the longing that runs through every age. A page of parchment catches your eye, half buried in dust near the altar. You pick it up gently. The ink has faded to a rusty brown, but you can still make out the words, "Blessed are the ones who crave, for they remember they are alive." No saint ever said that, as far as history records. But maybe some forgotten scribe did. Maybe it was their small rebellion, a whisper smuggled into eternity. You tuck the page back where you found it. As night falls, you light one of the old candles still sitting on the altar. The wax sputters, melts, and the flame steadies. You sit in the flickering glow, the shadows moving like slow waves on the stone. You remember everything you've seen on this strange journey, the crowded brothel, the monk's trembling prayer, the artist's haunted brushstrokes, the abbess who spoke of weeds and roses. Each of them carried a version of the same story, the one about wanting, hiding, repenting, and then wanting again. You realize now that medieval Europe wasn't so different from your own world. The costumes changed, the music shifted, the punishments softened, but the pulse beneath it all stayed the same. Lust, love, shame, faith. They've always shared the same heartbeat. You close your eyes and listen to the ocean. It sounds like breathing, again. Or maybe like forgiveness. For a moment, you picture that unseen monk, the one who carved love is not a sin, sitting right where you are now, staring out at the horizon, waiting for dawn. You imagine him realizing what you just have, that desire isn't the enemy of holiness. It's proof that the soul still stirs, still reaches, still refuses to be numb. And maybe that's the point. Wind, down 300 words. The candle burns low. The night folds itself softly around you. Every sound slows, the ocean, the wind, even your own heartbeat. The medieval world drifts away like a tide, leaving only the faint shimmer of memory behind. You breathe in, and the air feels centuries deep, full of ink and incense, salt and dust. You exhale, and the weight of all those old rules and fears slips quietly off your shoulders. The people you met tonight, those sinners and saints, painters and penitents, they're gone, but their echoes remain. You can still hear them if you listen closely enough. The whisper of a prayer that was half desire, the laughter that survived confession, the scratch of a quill that turned shame into poetry. They were human, perfectly, beautifully, frustratingly human. And so are you. You realize that the point of history isn't to judge those who came before, but to understand them, to see how much of their longing still lives inside you. That's what makes it comforting, in a strange way. You're never as far from the past as you think. The candle flickers once more and gutters out. You sit there for a long time, eyes closed, breathing in the silence, feeling the centuries settle. Then, in a voice only you can hear, the night seems to whisper, "You've survived the sins of the Middle Ages. Sleep now. You've earned it. Sweet dreams."